It's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was, my dad had a stroke, has been in intensive care for more than 2.5 months now and is still ventilated. Will he ever get off the ventilator? You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I answer another very important and also one of our most frequently asked questions from our readers, and the question this week is, how long does it take to die after removing the breathing machine or life support? If your loved one has been in intensive care for critical illness, and if your loved one is in a situation where the intensive care team has suggested to you or is potentially trying to coerce you and your family that stopping life support or withdrawing treatment might be, quote unquote, in the best interest for your critically ill loved one, then you and your family might be wondering how long it will actually take until your loved one will pass away after life support has been removed. First of all, if you are in this difficult, challenging and also once in a lifetime situation that you know you can't afford to get wrong, that you are potentially about to lose a loved one to critical illness in intensive care, then I can only empathize how terrible and awful you and your family must feel. And I can only empathize the pain and the frustration you and your family must be going through. What's also very important to know in a situation like this is that when it comes to removal of the breathing tube in a potential end-of-life situation, that moral and ethical issues such as euthanasia need to be considered, as in some situations, removal of the breathing tube or removal of the ventilator and euthanasia go hand in hand, and unless you are informed about it, you may not even realize that it is happening. And I will come to a more detailed explanation about euthanasia later. Now, 99% of families in intensive care make no informed decisions. They have no peace of mind, no control, no power, and no influence whatsoever when they have a loved one critically ill in intensive care. Therefore, in order to get into the 1% bracket of families in intensive care who do make informed decisions, have peace of mind, control, power, and influence, please pay close attention to what I'm about to share. First off, it's never what you've been told that determines the outcome. It's always how you react that determines the outcome. You can't control other people. You can't control what they say, etc. But you are 100% in control of how you react. What do I mean by that? By that, I mean before you even research the answer to how long does it take to die after removing the breathing machine or life support, you will need to find out if your critically ill loved one is in a quote-unquote real or in a quote-unquote perceived end-of-life situation. What do I mean by that? I'm really glad you've asked. The answer to that question will really determine if your loved one is really dying and approaching their end of life, or is it just a perception from the intensive care team. Now, you should really have a look at an article that I wrote about this, the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. To read this article or watch the video about the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations when your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, you need to scroll below this video and click on the link to get to that article and video. And if you are watching this on YouTube, just click on the link below this video. That'll get you to our website where you can access today's article and also the other article, the difference between real and perceived end-of-life situations. Now, if your critically ill loved one is in a real and not in a perceived end-of-life situation, please carry on. If your loved one is in a perceived end-of-life situation, I would highly recommend to continue checking out another article, the 5 questions you need to ask when the intensive care team is talking about futility of treatment, withdrawal of life support, or withdrawal of treatment. So you should check out that article or video next. Again, if you are on our website already, scroll down below this video and click on the link to that article and video. So carrying on here, is removing the breathing tube, ventilation, and endotracheal tube hastening death, and is it euthanasia? Now, what 99% of the families of critically ill patients in intensive care don't know is that removing the breathing tube or endotracheal tube with the intent to let a critically ill patient pass away because they are otherwise dependent on life support may not happen straight away after the ventilator and the breathing tube are removed. Sometimes this can take hours, days, or even weeks. Therefore, death is often hastened by giving high doses of sedatives and opiate drugs such as midazolam or Versed, which is a benzodiazepine, and also morphine or fentanyl. Morphine or fentanyl are strong opiates. Opiates are painkillers. The combination of high doses of benzodiazepines such as midazolam or Versed and opiates such as morphine and fentanyl can hasten death, and this common practice can be perceived as euthanasia. If you do agree to such practice, you may agree to euthanasia, and euthanasia is illegal in most countries. The definition of euthanasia is as follows: the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease or in an irreversible coma. After all, premature mortality is a significant cost saver in healthcare, especially in countries with an aging population and with a worldwide shortage of ICU beds. You and your family will need to be very clear if you agree to a process that could potentially kill your critically ill loved one by hastening death when sedative and opiate drugs are given, when artificial life support such as ventilation and the breathing tube or endotracheal tube are being removed. If mechanical ventilation and the breathing tube or endotracheal tube are removed without giving any sedation and opiates, and nature take its course fast, then you can be certain that your critically ill loved one is in a real and not in a perceived end-of-life situation. That's why it's so important that you never rush into making such a life or death decision. You can't really afford to rush into such a life or death decision. Once the decision has been made, it's too late. Once your critically ill loved one has passed away, you can't bring them back. You will need to find out how an intensive care unit operates before you agree to such a life or death decision. You will need to find out about the politics, the hidden secrets, the dynamics, and the elephant in the room, so to speak. What's driving the decisions in an intensive care unit? How is the financial budget and the potential shortage of ICU beds contributing to suggest to remove life support and the breathing tube? Intensive care is not an easy environment after all, and if anything, it's generally testing your faith, your spirit, your belief system, and the values you have. You and your family are going through a tough challenge, and that's even more so if your loved one is approaching their end of life in intensive care. Let's face it, after you and your family have come to the conclusion, after you've had meetings with the intensive care team, and also after you have done your own independent research here at intensivecarehotline.com, and you have come to the conclusion that the end of the life of your critically ill loved one is inevitable, you and your family want to make sure that your loved one isn't going to suffer unnecessarily, and maybe you also want to get the timing right in such a end-of-life situation, because you want to make sure that you and your family are present when life support or the ventilator and the breathing tube are removed. Whatever you and your family choose to do in such a difficult and challenging situation, whether you do or you don't want to be present during removal of life support, it's your choice. And after all, most importantly, you want to have peace of mind, control, power, and influence during this quote-unquote once-in-a-lifetime situation. So choose what you feel is the right thing for you and your family. Most importantly, and once again, do not let anybody pressure you to agree to something that you are not ready to as yet. I have seen way too many end-of-life situations in nearly 20 years intensive care nursing in 3 different countries, and where I also worked as a nurse unit manager for over 5 years, where families of critically ill patients have been pushed into agreeing to removing or stopping life support because the intensive care team was A, needing the intensive care bed quickly for another patient in need of intensive care and critical care admission. B, they didn't want to use more of any perceived limited resources and basically save money. They also didn't want to get too emotionally involved into a potential end-of-life situation. And they didn't want to deal with a quote-unquote difficult family any longer, where the intensive care team just couldn't handle the pressure and the emotions of a family to continue treatment. And intensive care teams often also finish off doing some medical research with a critically ill patient, and now they're ready to let your loved one pass away. The bottom line is that you and your family want to be in a position where you can make informed decisions. You want to be in control. You want to have peace of mind, power, and influence in this, again, once-in-a-lifetime situation. Now, I also want to hone in on how to make sure that your needs are met in such a difficult situation. Again, if you and your family need more time that you want to spend with your critically ill loved one before life support or the ventilator will be removed because you are waiting for other important family members or friends to be present, then you need to make that very clear to the intensive care team. If you and your family member want to spend another day or night at the bedside with your critically ill loved one, then you need to make that very clear to the intensive care team, and you should accept nothing less than what you want. If you and your family want to have certain spiritual, cultural, or religious needs met, again, you should be asking for that, and you should accept nothing less than what you are asking for. If you want to have your loved one pass away at home, despite their ventilation, you should ask for it, as certain services can be provided, such as a service like intensive care at home. It's a very holistic care service, and it focuses on the needs of patients and their families, but it also focuses on the needs of an intensive care unit, which is saving money and beds. With a service like intensive care at home, intensive care beds, the cost of an intensive care bed can be reduced to less than 50%, and an in-demand intensive care bed can be freed up. Also, if you think and feel that your loved one is unnecessarily suffering and you think that every minute of their life is a burden, then you should make that very clear also. The bottom line and the fact of the matter in this once-in-a-lifetime situation is that you and your family want to leave this situation with having left no stone unturned, making informed decisions. You want to have peace of mind, control, power, and influence. Because as heartbreaking as this situation is for you and your family, you don't want to overburden yourself and you don't want to have any regrets. You don't want to leave with a bitter taste in your mouth and think afterwards that the end of life situation could have been handled differently and better, or that your loved one could have been saved. Also, don't assume that because the intensive care team is dealing with end-of-life situations regularly, that they know or understand what your wishes really are. Intensive care is a high-pressure environment, and the intensive care team might hasten or speed up this end-of-life situation in a manner that you don't feel comfortable with. You and your family need to live with the memories of this situation for the rest of your lives, so make sure your needs are met. After you and your family have established what the end-of-life situation should look like so that you can have peace of mind, control, power, and influence, then you can hopefully approach the situation with more comfort, confidence, and then you can finally let go. By the time life support or ventilation will be removed, your critically ill loved one may respond in a number of ways that are hardly foreseeable or predictable. If your critically ill loved one is fully ventilator dependent and not on any medical support for low blood pressure, also known as inotropes or vasopressors, once the breathing tube and the ventilator have been removed, your loved one can die within a few minutes, or sometimes it can take a few days or even weeks. The main difference tends to be how strong your critically ill loved one's heart still beats, and also how dependent they were on the ventilator in the first place. Now, if your critically ill loved one is ventilated, has a breathing tube, and is on high inotropic support, also known as vasopressors, which is basically intravenous medication for low blood pressure, then your critically ill loved one may pass away relatively quickly within minutes or few hours after those life-sustaining measures have been removed. Most importantly, in any of those situations, it is of utmost importance that your critically ill loved one is not suffering. This usually can be achieved by giving high doses of the sedation and opiates, and the drug generally used during those end-of-life situations are sedatives such as midazolam or Versed, and opiates, which are painkillers such as morphine or fentanyl. Generally speaking, high doses means 10 to 15 milligrams per hour of each drug. Sometimes boluses of the drugs may be given as well. Again, as I mentioned before, if you do agree to such practice, you may agree to euthanasia, and euthanasia is illegal in most first world countries. I really hope that helps, and I hope that even though you and your family are in a difficult, challenging, and once-in-a-lifetime situation, that you can leave this situation with having made an informed decision, have peace of mind, control, power, and influence. Always remember, you can't change what happens to you, but you are 100% in control of how you react to it. Also, I hope no matter how difficult, challenging, heartbreaking, and devastating this situation may appear to you, try and find some meaning and strength in this situation. Is there meaning after all? Does the death of your loved one serve a higher purpose? Whilst I can't answer this question for you, I believe that if you keep looking for it, that you'll find meaning, purpose, and clarity. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? How can you make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence quickly, whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? you will get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you will learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You will get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You will get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also have a look at our Your Questions Answered section, where I answer your questions, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. You can also call me. Find international phone numbers on the top of the website. Also, have a look at our membership site intensivecaresupport.org for families of critically ill patients in intensive care. Also, have a look at our ebook section, and you can also get one-on-one consulting and advocacy with me via Skype, over the phone, and via email by clicking on the relevant tabs on the top of the website. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.